Hello, I'm Emily and I live in England with my hubby Matt and our 3 sons, 6-year-old Fraser, 3-year-old Caleb and 1-year-old Jackson. I'm so grateful for all the love and support that I get from doing this channel, so I decided to do something special when I reached 100,000 subscribers. So I thought now would be a good time to tell you a bit more about myself. My story is quite shocking in places, so I'm going to give a trigger warning here because I will be talking about abuse and suicide, so this video is not for children. There are parts of my story that I've never told anyone. I've kept them locked away and I finally feel ready to tell my story. So here goes. Now, I was actually born in Canada, Toronto to be exact. My mum was only 20 when she had me and I was lucky enough to already have an older sister, Charlie. My earliest memory was waking up one night to a loud bang. I went to see what was going on and I found my sister picking up lots of little black plastic keys off of the floor. I was tired and confused, but it turned out that my father had thrown my mum's typewriter at her during a late night argument. My sister was trying to pick all of the keys up. We must have gone back to bed because the next thing I remember is being woken up by my mum and telling me that we were going to get on a train to go see my grandma and grandpa. My abusive alcoholic father had passed out on the couch and we were leaving. We lived with my grandparents for a while in a very nice neighborhood, but somehow our dad still had partial custody over us, meaning that we had to visit him on the weekends. I won't go into specifics, but on those weekends, away from my grandparents, away from our mum, my father would abuse me and my sister in every way possible. We were just 3 and 5. Those memories will always haunt me, and I still struggle to sleep when the images come back of him sitting there in his filthy living room, naked mostly, stinking of tobacco, and always drunk. I still have a scar on my left arm from where he burnt me with a cigarette once. I couldn't say if it was an accident or not, I was too young to remember, but whenever anyone has asked me up until this point, I have said it's a mark from an injection. Out of everything, the worst thing wasn't the abuse, it was being kidnapped. This happened a few times. On one occasion, he collected us from school and just took us. Luckily though, it didn't take long for him to get drunk again, and my sister somehow managed to call home on a payphone and tell my mum that we were in a cafe and read out the letters on the street sign of where we were. The police came to take us home, which was pretty terrifying. I was 5 years old when this happened, and I remember panicking about getting into the police car that had a cage in it. My older sister finally told our mum about what was happening with our dad, and after a long time with my mum fighting in the courts and providing medical evidence of the sexual abuse, the authorities finally intervened. We still had to see him though, except now the visits took place at a special centre under the supervision of social workers. I remember being so scared that I'd often throw up in the car on the way there. Thankfully, most of the time he would forget to turn up because he was so drunk. I used to feel relieved, but then also in a weird way, somehow sad that he didn't want to see us or that he had forgotten about us. It was all so confusing that the courts sent us to see a shrink. My way of dealing with everything that was going on was complete shutdown. I wouldn't say a word. They tried to get me to draw pictures instead, but I also refused to do that. The irony of me now drawing my life for you. When I was 6 or 7, my school teacher found me shivering alone in a coat closet at school. At the end of the day, she sat me down and asked if there was anything that I wanted to tell her. Anything at all. But the words just wouldn't come out. On the street where we lived, there were 3 sisters, and we used to play at each other's houses all of the time. And eventually, their dad and our mum hit it off and got together. We rented a little house with him and his daughters, and although we had no money, I really loved having so many sisters around all of a sudden. I didn't think much of my new stepdad though. He was incredibly strict. He'd recently been in the Navy for 10 years of service, and I guess it'd given him OCD. The beds had to be made this way, clothes had to be folded just so. I remember him screaming, "Where are your slippers?" And then when we found them, he would hit us with them. Yeah, I guess he was a total Fruit Loop, but he was way better than my actual dad, so I kind of just went with it. When I was 9, we moved again, and we were finally able to stop seeing my real dad. We were still really poor, but my mum always said it was better to have the worst house in a good area than the best house in a bad one. So there we were, all 7 of us, in the smallest house you ever saw, but in a really nice part of town. My 3 stepsisters lived with us during the week and would visit their mum every weekend. Then, one Sunday evening, the eldest of the three telephoned to say that she wasn't coming home. She wanted to stay and live with her mum. I was devastated. A few weeks later, the middle sister did the same, and then finally, the youngest one left too. As if that wasn't enough, our stepdad was also being sued by his ex-wife for child support, which of course, we couldn't afford. To avoid being chased for Canadian child support, the best option was to move again. And at the age of 14, you'd think it would be really difficult to move countries, but I was so excited to have a new start, especially in a place that had the Spice Girls and Oasis and the Queen. We rented a house in Essex just outside of London, and my mum got a job at a local supermarket. She had worked really hard in Canada before we left, doing night school and courses at college. With her new qualifications, she was eventually able to land herself a job in banking in London, and things were finally starting to look up. I'd started high school as well, and I was busy making friends, discovering makeup, music, and boys. I even dated one of those boys for 5 years, but things didn't work out. I couldn't really talk to him about my past or even my present. To be honest, I never really opened up to anyone. It was around this time that my sister started acting really strange, and I found out that she had accused my stepdad of sexually abusing her. He'd never done anything like that to me, so when my mum asked me, I told her that. Charlie had become a bit of a rebel, she was drinking heavily, and no one really believed her. Everyone sort of dismissed it. Even our family shrink said that she was lying. Things got so tough for Charlie that she ended up moving back to Canada to live with our grandma. Where I once had 4 sisters, I now had none. When I was 17, my mum went back to Canada on a business trip, leaving me alone with my stepfather for the first time. It was then that he started acting really strange. He became nice. He was normally so mean, but when my mum was away, he was completely different. He began offering me lifts to school and even said that I could drive a car, and I didn't even have a license. But then he turned nasty, saying inappropriate things you simply don't say to your 17-year-old stepdaughter, and he hated me having a boyfriend. With my mum still away, I went into my bedroom one day and I immediately sensed that something was different. I realized that my display of handbags had been rearranged. I reached up onto the shelf where they sat and I found a little black box and what looked like a lens on the front of it. As soon as I touched it, my stepdad burst into the room, and I knew right away that it was a camera and that he had been watching me. I acted like I believed his lies and excuses of whatever he claimed the camera was, and I just went to bed, scared and confused. The next day, I waited until he'd gone to work, and then I began looking around the house, and it didn't take me long to find it all. Hidden inside a closet and stacked outside in the shed, I unearthed all sorts of recording equipment. Cameras, cables, wires, all sorts of things. I switched one of the cameras on, and I saw a video of my mum in the shower. She clearly didn't know that she was being filmed. I called my mum in Canada and I stayed at a friend's house until she got home. The day she arrived, after my stepdad had gone to work again, we gathered everything up and went straight to the police. They arrested him that day, but he wasn't in custody for long. Because I was over 60 years old, because it was our family home, and because he was a legal stepfather, they claimed that we couldn't prove that my mum and I hadn't consented to being filmed. I assured them I had not consented. When he was released, he was homeless. He began drinking heavily and became depressed about what he'd done to Charlie. My poor sister had been telling the truth all along. Shortly after that, he tried to commit suicide by gassing himself in his car. Maybe it was a cry for help, I don't know, but then he was put in a local care centre to be monitored. He then got out after just a few days. He could always turn on the charm when he needed to, and knowing that he was still in the neighbourhood scared me so much. What would he do if he found me? I had ruined his life. Walking home from school each day, my heart would jump out of my chest. It was like living in a horror movie, but the movie only lasted 3 weeks. When I got home from school one day, my mum was at home, and I could tell just by looking at her that he was dead. He'd gone to a local park and he had ended his life, unable to live with what he had done. It might sound horrible, and any suicide is a tragic waste of life, but I felt a huge surge of relief. Relief that he couldn't come after me. He was gone. This all happened when I was 17 years old, right in the middle of my senior years of high school. It's amazing that I learned anything at all, but the next year I managed somehow to pass my A-levels with decent grades, and go off to university when I was 18 to study marketing. Those 3 years at uni were the best of my life up until that point. I made such wonderful friends, and I loved that no one knew my full history. We slept too little, we drank too much. I was even FHM Student of the Month once, which made me a minor celebrity around campus. I graduated from uni and I got a job as a marketing assistant at a paper company. It was just like the TV show The Office, except much, much more boring. I decided to run off and travel the world. To help fund my trip, I got a second job as a waitress at a bar in Essex called the Sugar Hut. So yes, as well as being in the office, I could have now been in Towie too. Late one night after working non-stop at my 2 jobs, my friends came into the bar and suggested we go to the nightclub together. We were travelling into London the next day to book our round-the-world flight tickets, and they wanted to celebrate. I was really tired and I didn't have a change of clothes, but for some reason, I went anyway. And I'm glad that I did. There was a group of guys at the club that night and I recognized one of them. He and his family used to come into the restaurant where I worked when I was 14, back when I arrived in the UK. We'd never spoken, but I'd always fancied him. And yes, you guessed it, his name was Matt. That night that very nearly didn't happen, I was finally introduced to my future husband, my angel that was in disguise as a model, Matt. We ended up swapping numbers and having a snog outside the kebab shop, as you do, and I told him straight away about my travel plans. I was going away for 7 months in total, taking in the USA, Fiji, New Zealand, Australia, and Southeast Asia. I still had 5 months until I left the UK, so Matt and I started dating and we soon fell in love. It was really hard not to. He was so funny and handsome and just genuinely kind and honest person. During my childhood, for obvious reasons, I'd always had trouble trusting men, but with Matt, that all went away. As my trip got closer, I considered cancelling to stay with Matt, but I knew I'd regret it forever if things didn't work out between us. It was such a sad goodbye, but off I went. After we landed in LA, I called and emailed Matt every day, but it wasn't really enough. Just 2 weeks in, during one of our phone calls, I came out with it and I suggested that he come and join me. He didn't waste any time. In the space of 2 months, he'd quit his job, sold his car, and dropped everything to fly out to Australia to be with me. I guess it was a bit of a risk for both of us, but we had such an amazing time. We were young, carefree, and falling in love more and more with each new day in each new country. We drove 4x4s on Fraser Island in Australia. We camped under the stars. We scuba dived on the Great Barrier Reef hand in hand. We swam with pink dolphins in Singapore. We stayed in bamboo huts in Thailand and watched the sunrise over Angkor Wat in Cambodia. We cuddled koalas, we met random locals, we even got chased out of a hostel by a crazy Vietnamese man. It was and still is one of the best experiences I've had in my entire life. I grew up a lot and learned so much about who I am. I think we both did. I was 22 when we returned to the UK, and my mum was preparing to move back to Canada, so Matt and I decided to buy a flat and move in together. It was an easy decision after so many months of living in each other's pockets. I got an amazing job working in beauty PR in London, and Matt set up his very own business, the first ever male grooming salon in Essex. Then, after 3 years together, Matt proposed. We were in Venice, standing by the gorgeous Rialto Bridge. He got down on one knee and I couldn't quite take in what was happening. I didn't understand, and I still don't really, how such a wonderful man could want to be with me, so I said yes immediately. We got married and I became pregnant soon after. We named our first son Fraser, after Fraser Island in Australia, and we bought our first house together. When Fraser was born, I was surprised at how much I instantly loved him, and I actually became a very protective mother. Too protective, really. I think it had a lot to do with my childhood. I began experiencing anxiety and panic attacks, especially if I couldn't see Fraser or if other people were holding him. I also found it hard to trust Matt with our new baby. After all, my dad harmed me, and I knew I was being ridiculous, but at the same time it was true, and I guess it's hard to let go of memories like that. It wasn't until Fraser was about 5 months old that I was finally able to leave him for an hour to get my hair done. Matt and Fraser sat in the Starbucks next door to the salon, but the anxiety was immense, and I cried the entire time. Our friends and family even started noticing how bad I'd become, but I really didn't want to tell anyone about my past. It was too painful. When Fraser was 10 months old, I had to go back to work, and putting him in nursery was the single hardest thing I have ever done in my whole life, but I had no choice. I made it through the first tough months, and then I changed jobs to a flexible, more kid-friendly role. Then, when Fraser was 2, we found out we were expecting again, and along came our second son, Caleb. Caleb was born, and again, so perfect. Even the second time around, I couldn't believe the sudden rush of love. As they say, your heart doesn't split when you have 2 children, it doubles in size. In 2014, when Caleb was about 6 months old, I decided to make my first ever YouTube video. I'd been enjoying other parenting videos, so I thought, why not? And I was also feeling a little bit isolated in motherhood, to tell you the truth. I made a little video about how I was weaning Caleb, and I got some really positive comments. I quickly fell in love with the YouTube community, and I have uploaded videos every week since, recounting my parenting experiences and sharing tips and tricks with other parents to try. When Caleb turned 2, we found that we were pregnant again with our 3rd son, and I documented my pregnancy on YouTube week by week, and we gave birth to Jackson at home while updating on Facebook Live. Again, he's just the happiest, most amazing little guy, and he has fitted right into our crazy little family. While on maternity leave with Jackson, my YouTube channel grew to a point where I could give up my job and focus on making videos. It has been a dream come true, and I feel so privileged to be able to work from home and see my boys grow up every day. My boys are my world, and maybe it's fate that it is now my job to raise 3 honest, caring, and respectful men, rather than the poor excuses of fathers that I had. So there it is, and as for the rest of the story, well, you'll have to keep watching my channel. So you see, I told you there would be a happy ending, but you know what? I wouldn't change anything about my life because it has all led me to Matt and our 3 wonderful boys. In so many ways, Matt has saved me, and I don't know where I would be without him. I have a lot to be grateful for. And I'll admit that sometimes I feel very lonely, especially with all of my family living in Canada, but I'm so lucky to have such amazing friends in the UK, and of course, all of you guys. It would be easy for me to let the bad days and the flashbacks get me down, but I only have to look at my boys to remember how far I've come. The future, I think, is going to be beautiful. If you've been affected by watching my story, please remember you're not alone, and I will leave some links in the description bar of places that can help you. The last thing I wanted to say is that you define your past. Your past doesn't define you. If my story can provide strength and inspiration to just one person out there, then it has been worth sharing. No matter where you are right now, no matter how hard life might seem, things will get better, and hope is a very powerful thing. If you have any questions, please put them in the comments down below, and thank you so much for watching. I love you guys. Bye.